let's get started here. Very quickly, SPYs are down 0.7%, Qs are down 1.6%, but that's including the fact that we're trading lower after hours here because of Microsoft's earnings and IWM. Excuse me, the IWM here is down 1%. So just real quick, obviously there's honestly a lot to talk about today, and we're trying to do a shortened meeting because of all these earnings reports. But just to address Jorge's question real quick, because if he has the question, I'm sure somebody else has the question, even though this is something I speak about quite often when it comes into earnings season. It is very typical for new traders who have never been in the professional trading business before to make the following mistake, and I really don't want anyone to make this mistake, so it's worth mentioning. You see a company reported earnings, like Microsoft just did. You see that it crushed literally every metric. Every single metric was a beat. Well, we haven't seen guidance yet, but even sometimes you see every single metric and guidance, everything across the board is a beat. And then the new trader comes in and buys and says, oh, it has to go up because the numbers were beat across the board, and the stock goes down all day. The opposite happens sometimes also. Google's out. The opposite happens sometimes also. Numbers miss across the board, and the stock goes up all day. So what are Google's numbers? That's a huge EPS number. Oh my God, that revenue number. Oh man, this is why it's very hard to do an afternoon meeting on this day. I'm not trading Google after hours. Those stock's nuts. Yeah, seriously, that's what we saw. I mean, that's what we saw last earnings season, right? And Jorge, this is exactly what happened last earnings season. The Apple numbers, the Amazon numbers, the Microsoft numbers, they all crushed it, and all the stocks sold off on those numbers because it's not enough just to beat analyst expectations, right? The analyst expectations, like right now, Alphabet second quarter EPS 27.26 estimate, is what it came in at, and the estimate was 19.35. So it's a huge beat on the number, but whose estimate, right? The estimate for Alphabet is $19.35 per share on EPS. Who creates that estimate? It's sell-side analysts, but sell-side analysts don't manage money, right? So fine, it beats their expectations, but does that really matter if they don't actually move money? The answer is no. The expectations that the stock needs to beat in order to go higher is the money managers, the big funds, the people who own a ton of the stock. And they're not going to tell you what their internal numbers are. So maybe, Pat here is posting, again, just to stick with Alphabet, that the estimate was $19.35, but that's some sell-side analyst who doesn't move money. Maybe the third biggest holder of Alphabet, their EPS expectation is actually $30 a share, in which case it's a huge miss. So those guys are coming in and they're dumping Google and dumping Google and dumping Google, and you're sitting there scratching your head on how come the stock is going down when it looks like they beat on the numbers. So as probably a general rule, if companies beat their numbers across the board, it goes up, and if companies miss on the numbers across the board, it goes down. But it's not a hard, fast fact, and in many ways, guidance is more important than the earnings report. People care more about the future than what just happened. And again, that's also not 100% true. That's also we're definitely doing some generalizing here. And that's why, so Microsoft said that they're not going to announce their guidance for the future until their conference call today. So we're still going to be waiting on that information. What's AMD doing? AMD initially trading higher here also. EPS 63 cents beats the 54-cent estimates, another big beat. Sales beats the estimate also. These numbers from all these companies are so massive. Again, that's what we saw last time also. Microsoft maybe trying to bounce back a little bit. AMD trading a little bit higher here also. Yeah, so the big thing, I mean, today was kind of a crazy day. It was a little bit of a massacre at certain points. You know, the Qs are down 1.25% right now. The Qs are down 2% at one point today. The IWM was down 2% at one point today. They each closed down about 1.25%. No real relative strength, relative weakness between the IWM and the Qs today. But these downtrends, particularly this Q downtrend on an intraday basis, was vicious. A lot of times when you're down 2% in the indices, a percentage of that's from a gap. Q's basically opened up flat today, and they sold this thing all the way down. Just kind of what seems like a complete bloodbath. But then you look at the chart here, the daily chart of the Qs, and look where we just came from. We just had a straight line up from our last pivot low here, which was just a few days ago at 352. We go from 352 straight up to 370, and now we just have a technical correction back into the moving averages, and we close significantly off lows. NASDAQ here is still really healthy, though we got to see how these earnings reports really affect things. We'll probably have a better clarity on that tomorrow. The IWM, actually, I'm pretty happy with the close in the IWM. IWM was weakest first and started to sell off. It looked like this pattern was breaking to the downside, but we actually closed above this pivot low here. So we're really still kind of in this wedge consolidation pattern here for the IWM. So that doesn't look terrible either, even though it was a bit of a bloodbath for certain stocks. The Chinese names were obviously a really big focus today. They were not easy trades. The JD opening trade was great. My price on this was 63. I sold a bunch of stock into the move higher, and then I trailed pretty tightly. I got stopped out on the way down here, really on the break of this low, and some stock I gave a little bit more room, but I had a nice little opening profitable trade in JD, and then I very quickly got out of the way as this thing broke lows and needed time to digest before finally rounding up here a little bit. JD did not close that bad considering what its lows were. At a certain point here, when this thing was still around 62 before this end of the day rally, I was actually praying for a weak close. I think if we could have gotten one more weak close and big gap down on JD Baba, it would be beyond money to come in and buy that degree of extension. But of course, those high levels of extremes, we don't see a lot. And these things ended up closing pretty well. Baba's got a little bit of a downside tail, huge volume. JD does as well. I mean, like I said, I do think that these companies are buys. It's just a matter of timing on it. Baidu, I don't look at as much today as Baba and JD. JD was really the bigger focus for me, even though I really ended up only trading JD at the open and then getting out of the way. And then NIO, on the other hand, was relatively strong early, and then they completely sold this. I think this may have something to do with Tesla as well. Tesla traded down a little bit on its earnings, but they crushed this NIO. So some weird price action, how some of these stocks are opening flat, like a NIO and even a DD opened up flat, but then they're selling NIO. DD came down and then back up, and then Baba and JD with the huge gap downs that got bought up a little bit. So just pretty crazy price action there from the Chinese names. I mean, for the most part today, that's what I was trying to focus on. I was trying to focus on these Chinese name stocks that I really think are in play. I mean, look, I am not going to not become bullish on Baba and JD over what's going on right now. And if anything, I think we've got to be closer to the end on the regulatory stuff than the beginning at this point, with the blocking of WeChat and everything else that's kind of going on over there. I actually, that the Chinese government pays attention to the stock market, our stock market, particularly their stock market, and this is starting to really have a negative impact on their stock market. They don't want it to be so that people are never going to invest in Chinese companies again. They just want to not give up power. They don't want China to become kind of what the United States is, where in the United States, you could easily make an argument that big tech influences the government more than the government influences big tech. And that these companies, Google and Apple and Amazon, are just so powerful at this point that they, control aspects of the government as much as the opposite. And the Chinese government's just not going to allow that. So you see a company do first what Jack Ma did, and then you see a company do what Didi did, and potentially give up government secrets and just do what the government didn't want, and they're going to make an example of it. And they're going to make an example of it across the board, and they're going to kind of restructure some things. But at the same time as we're seeing that, it's like I said yesterday, they're also reaching out to Ant Financial and to Tencent to explore the creation of the digital yuan. So it's not like those companies are going anywhere. The government is invested in these companies. So, but they think in much bigger horizons in the long run. Man, this TTD was also a solid opening trade, but then it kind of capitulated to the market here. Now, of course, it's up after hours. That's basically it. I just wanted to go over my thoughts on China. It's actually going to be interesting because Apple, a big tech, Apple has huge China exposure. And you wonder how much of Apple's selling today was because of that or just from the selling across the board. So it's going to be really interesting to see Apple here in 5 minutes. And that's basically it. I just kind of wanted to touch on the market a little bit. The IWM seems fine, honestly, because it closed well enough. The Qs just pulled back to equilibrium and bounced back. And the SPYs were relatively strong all day, barely touched the ADMA. I wanted to talk a little bit about those Chinese names. I'm still definitely an advocate of buying JD and BABA. It's always about timing, right? And there were some opportunities today, but even though this JD closed well, they made that very hard with just that turnaround rally into the close. So that's pretty much it. We're going to see Apple here in 5 minutes. So I'll end our little shorty afternoon meeting. Microsoft has profit equal to 30% of sales for the year. I know. Microsoft is trading down here on these numbers. Those numbers are fantastic. Microsoft has always been more of a grinder, though. And whenever Microsoft actually gaps up big on earnings, they almost always sell it off because it's really not a momentum stock. So we'll see what happens with this thing. What's Google doing? Google's still holding up. Google's numbers are also pretty tremendous. Yeah, I guess so. But when you start like sanctioning and putting tariffs to a large degree on China, you hurt yourself domestically, like at least as much as you hurt them. They're just too deep into the world economy at this point. And honestly, like some of the things that the politicians like to grandstand about, like what's going on with the Uyghur Muslims in, what is it, Xinjiang. The government doesn't, honestly, I hate to say this, but the U.S. government doesn't care about that at all. It's just grandstanding. You only start to hear about the Uyghur Muslims when we're trying to position ourselves for something else out there. Yeah, so I'm not trading any of these right now. I mean, Microsoft would be one that I would trade. But I didn't really see anything that got me excited about how they sold those numbers. AMD would be one that I sometimes trade. Apple is one I sometimes trade. If you're trading after hours on the report, it's entirely based on tape reading, at least initially. And then at a certain point, you can start looking at the after hours technicals. But at least initially, it's about tape reading. So that's what I'm looking for. And then the next day, you want to pay attention to the levels that these stocks create after hours, because those levels are usually still important the next day. They're usually still in play the next day. That's the one time really pre and post market levels are really important, is specifically on earnings. But for the most part, during the trading day tomorrow, the general rule is you just want to trade the stock in the direction which is trading. Microsoft is trading higher, you want to trade it up. You want to trade it to the long side. Microsoft is trading, not talking about if it's green or red on the day. I'm talking about the actual direction in which it's trading, because it's all about momentum. It's all about momentum with these earnings names. All right, gang, about 2 minutes here till Apple's earnings. So I'm going to end our little shortened afternoon meeting, and we will see what these numbers look like. I'll probably just stay on the radio. Felipe's scared. So Apple closed at 146.78 today. So it's trading up about 30 cents or so from the closing price into the report. I mean, I do trade differently after hours because it's much less technically based. But if you're trading after hours, you really got to know how to, because I do not recommend, if this is the first 1 year of your career, you should not trade after hours. I'll just go ahead and say that. And that's because certain types of orders don't work. There's no stops after hours. You can't put a stop into a stock after hours. It won't work. You can't route to New York Stock Exchange after hours. It won't work. After 6 p.m., certain other ECNs drop off. ARCA and NASDAQ are go-tos till 8 p.m., so you can consistently go to them. $150 is the daily level in Apple for sure. Pay attention to. We're going to be surprised if Apple trades through 150 here after hours, though. I mean, those numbers are going to have to be unbelievable. It had such a big run into this report, too. Doesn't have to be exactly 430, but it's usually pretty close to it. Boom. That was a pretty strong initial uptick there. 149's got 100K on the offer. It touched that 149. I didn't see it print above. The chart says it went above, but I never saw it print above 149. 149 was just about to say would be the spot to buy through there. Was not a good break of it. All right, so the 149 area here showing some initial resistance. Oh man, that EPS number crushed. Oh my god, those numbers are so insane. And they're selling it back down to where we closed here. All right, so you're looking right now initially at that 149 to 150 area, which we already know is daily chart resistance, also is after hour resistance here. Look for some sort of buyback information. That's always really important. Seeing 135K on the offer at 149 now in Apple, trading back up to it a little bit. 35K came in at 148. 148.50 looked like it sold a little bit, but it wasn't enough prints for me to be able to really tell. That was the last high tick though. So your first high tick was a bit above 149. Your second high tick was 148.50. So technically, in the tape, you have a lower high there. That's not good. And now they just broke that last low. That last low was 146.77. Felipe shorted some. That's probably the better trade right now, to be honest. $146 bought a little bit. But now that this thing's trading below 146.77, which was that first pivot low, now we have a lower high and a lower low on a very small time frame here. So you really need the bulls to come in and defend themselves. Got some more numbers here. want to see the China numbers, and I want to see if there's any updates on buyback information. They're not always this exciting, Ricky, but I'm always happy to take a look. 147. When the 147 right there was showing 130K, but they printed more than it. Not 130K. I'm sorry, 13K. They printed more of it than that, but now they broke it. You want to watch 148.50 on the upside right now. That was the last real pivot high. Buyer at 54 cents, broke. So that little high right there was around 147.74. So you want to see if that's another lower high on the tape. So potentially 140, I think it was 74 cents, 147.74 would be your next potential pivot here to pay attention to. It's trading a little bit sloppy though. There's a buyer that half bought again, but then pulled. You got a buyer and you got a seller, honestly, on each side of the market here right now. The 50 came back and bought again. That was after the 56 sold, but the 50 buyer broke. This third last little pivot right now is still 147.74. See if this 56 can break. 56 was selling just before. It's still selling. Still selling. ARCA. Yeah. So there's still a buyer here. Keeps the buyer drops his bid and then comes back in. There he is coming in at 51 again, but he keeps dropping as opposed to the seller that stays steady. There, the seller just broke and they got it above the 74 all in one sweep. So now we're back to looking at that 148.50 as the last real pivot high. Apple declares quarterly dividend at 22 cents per share. That might have been what helped uptick the stock right there to break that seller. But no real follow through on it. Looking at 65K on the offer at 148, not particularly important. There's more selling behind it. Yeah, this after-hour price action here so far in Apple is not great. I would still categorize it as more bearish than bullish. But 148.50, or no, I'm sorry, 145.80 I think now is still the important spot on the downside. So we're kind of wedging out a little bit, I guess. Yeah, getting pretty tight here in this 147 area. We'll see which way we break, or if we break. You know, the numbers are phenomenal. There's a chance that this thing just holds up, that they can't break it down because the numbers are too good, but they can't buy it up because the move into the numbers was too good. It was too big. Both combined, you have to watch them in conjunction with each other. Jordan. Yeah, have the services number come in. Revenue is a bit of an uptick. What's the market cap on Apple now? How many trillions are we up to? Yeah, very tight here right now on Apple. Let's see what Microsoft is doing. Nothing. Google pulled back a little bit. You'd want to see Google bounce here. And AMD pull back to flat. All of these names here are kind of non-events after hours, it seems like. Google's up very small. Microsoft is down very small. Apple is pretty much where it closed. Apple's struggling to get any traction in either direction. They're all on solid numbers. So I think for the most part, it's just that they bought these things up too much into the report. I honestly will be happy if these stocks are just able to hold up. After what we saw last earnings season with those phenomenal numbers where they crushed the stocks, I will honestly be happy if they just hold up. Apple just broke down below 147 a little bit. Apple's basically now trading exactly where it closed at. Very unexciting after hours price action, to be honest. Yeah, not seeing anything that is getting me too excited to do much trading here after hours today. Yep, that's a good point, Diego. I looked away from the tape in Apple for a second and I did not see the seller come in that you're referencing. Definitely is looking a little heavier here, though. 145.80 is like the only downside reference spot I've really got right now. Nice, Felipe. You might want to just, instead of covering there on the bid, Felipe, just take the offer if 147 seller breaks that you saw. There's no downside follow through either, though, to be honest. As a manual mental stop, yeah. Just watching that 70-cent guy to see if he would resize. He did not. Just a little 5,000 share buyer. Took out the 12K also. They're starting to take out some of those bids. This is starting to look a little not as good, but it's still hard to see a real big down move come in. And then a little buyer at 61 broke. Yeah, sellers are definitely in control for the moment. Felipe in the house. What are the Qs doing after hours? It's a false print, right? Yeah, Qs are down a little bit after hours. Where we closed. 146.20 selling a little bit on ARCA. The sellers are still in control on this thing. There's no major down moves off it. That ARCA, you see how he's just showing, this is what a refreshing seller looks like, right? He's just showing 100 shares at 20 cents. But look at all the ARCA prints going off in your tape. Level 2 is only showing 100 shares on the offer, 146.20, but you're seeing prints go off that are several thousand shares. Now it's 2,300 shares on the offer for 146.20. See how hard they're taking this guy right now? And those are small prints that time, but it was still 400, 100, 400, 400, 100, 100, 100. And then they broke him. Or actually, he's just stepped back 5 cents. He just brought his offer back 5 cents, and now he's selling it at the quarter. Which that's smart execution selling. You see how heavy your offer is getting taken. You say to yourself, all right, I could sell at a higher price. So let me lift my 20 offer back to 25. And then you saw what happened there was all the buyers came in the second the 20 broke and bought right into them at 25, fed right into them. So you got a bigger seller here that's in control driving this thing down. Step to 89 maybe? $89 selling ARCA. I would think this guy's got a lift at these prices. That 145.80 we spoke about earlier was some support here after hours. It just ticked below it. But I would think enough buying comes in to cause the seller to lift back here a little bit. Not that I would buy off that. Sellers are still clearly in control, but this is a good spot to book a little profit if you were short. Look at see that seller again? 5,000 shares, 3,000 shares. That guy is soaking up stock at 89 cents. There's no real offers coming down behind it. And this person who put this, I don't know what the deal is with that 20K offer that came in behind the seller. That's not how I would want to sell short or sell long. They broke him. Either that or he stepped back to 99. Yeah, I had a feeling there's no, if that seller's going to sit there at that price, he's probably going to get his order done. There's probably going to be a lot of buying coming in. That's what I was trying to say. And that's what happened. The question is if he's done now or if he just stepped back. And I'm just assuming it's a he, but it easily could be a she. Some siesta money. Nice job there, Felipe. Or are they? No problem, Justin. Again, tape reading is a skill that I'm pretty good at, but it's really not that important anymore. I hate saying that. It's only really important in certain scenarios, and honestly, trading after hours on earnings is one of the times when tape reading is still a pretty valuable skill to have. But for most of you guys, if anybody's newer getting involved in the business, you really want to focus on your technicals. And as time goes on here, the price action will start to slow down. Still a little early, so we'll probably still see some movement, but the later into the after hours price action you get, the slower it becomes. I have, without a doubt, on many occasions, traded some of these stocks here after hours till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night Eastern time. Don't think I'm going to be doing that this time around. I didn't really trade these at all. Apple short off that initial 149 was the best trade I saw here after hours, to be honest. There were some opportunities maybe to do some adding and taking away. That's it. Adios, Felipe. Good job, like usual. Cool, Jordan, for sure. Just building out a boring inside 5 here now in Apple. Very tight range these last 3 minutes. Let's take a quick look at what some of these other names are doing. Microsoft's not doing too much. No real bounce back. Google pivoted where I said it probably would. The technicals still apply here, right? You see the big move, the extension after hours on Google, the pullback into the ADMA, the pivot off of that. You want to see this pivot low hold. This tail, by the way, one of the problems with after hours technicals is you get a lot of fake tails, a lot of false prints. It's like this tail on this bar here for Google is not real. I'm assuming that the real low in Google was about this spot right here. So that's what you want to pay attention to right now in Google. AMD, really nothing too much to talk about with any of these names, which honestly, I actually really think that's a good thing. If these stocks can all be flattish, up small, down small tomorrow off these earnings reports, I would actually view that with a sigh of relief, because the moves that these companies had into these earnings reports were absolutely massive. And a lot of times when you have a huge run into earnings, the expectations are just too high on the report, and they'll sell it off on even really good numbers. It's a little bit of what we saw last quarter. Apple just broke up a little bit. It's a little bit of what we saw last quarter was they just sold those numbers, a big move into it, and they just dumped. I honestly thought that last quarter had even better numbers than this quarter, but the market's reacting very differently to it. So if we can just hold up here, I would honestly view that as very bullish for the big picture of the market. But all right, team, I think I'm going to sign off as well, just because these ones are starting to really die down here a little bit, and we'll just reassess the price action tomorrow on where these stocks are trading, and come up with our game plan for the day like we always do. So I'm going to get some other work done. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you all tomorrow.